The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty cattle auction yard in rural Texas. Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her brow as she walked between the metal pens, checking on the animals that would soon face their fate. She had been working at the livestock auction house for 3 years, and while the job paid the bills, it never got easier watching the animals come through. Sarah grew up on a small ranch outside of San Antonio, where her grandfather taught her to respect every living creature. Her family lost the ranch when she was 16, forcing them to move to the city. Now at 28, she found herself back in the world of cattle, but in a very different role than she had imagined as a child. The auction house was busy that Tuesday morning. Trucks arrived one after another, unloading cattle of all sizes and breeds. Most were destined for feedlots or slaughterhouses, part of the endless cycle that put meat on tables across America. Sarah had learned to keep her emotions in check, understanding that this was simply how the industry worked. As she made her rounds with her clipboard, checking ear tags and making notes, something caught her eye in pen number 7. Among a group of Black Angus cattle stood a cow that looked different from the rest. She was smaller, with unusual markings that made Sarah pause. The cow had a white heart-shaped patch on her forehead and gentle brown eyes that seemed to follow Sarah as she moved around the pen. Sarah pulled out the paperwork for pen 7 and read through the details. The cattle had come from the Henderson Ranch, about 40 miles north of town. According to the documentation, most were standard beef cattle ready for processing, but there was something in the notes that made Sarah's stomach drop. The cow with the heart-shaped marking was listed as a dairy cow, but she was pregnant and no longer producing enough milk to be profitable. The Henderson Ranch was known in the area for being a large commercial operation that focused purely on profit. They had been selling their less productive animals for years, and Sarah knew that a pregnant dairy cow would likely end up at a slaughterhouse rather than finding a home where she could live out her pregnancy in peace. Sarah found herself returning to pen 7 throughout the morning. Each time she approached, the cow with the heart marking would move closer to the fence, as if she somehow understood that Sarah was different from the other workers. There was an intelligence in those brown eyes that Sarah couldn't ignore. During her lunch break, Sarah sat on a wooden fence rail overlooking the pens and ate her sandwich while watching the cow. She had named her Luna in her mind, though she knew better than to get attached to the animals that came through the auction house. Her supervisor, Bill Thompson, had warned all the workers about forming emotional connections with the livestock. "They're not pets," Bill always said. "They're inventory. Keep that in mind, or this job will eat you alive." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Luna was different. The way she interacted with the other cattle showed a gentle nature. While the other animals pushed and shoved for position at the water trough, Luna waited patiently for her turn. When smaller cattle were bullied by larger ones, Luna would position herself between them, offering protection without aggression. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah learned more about Luna's story from the transport driver who had brought her in. The driver, a weathered man named Pete, had been hauling cattle for over 20 years and remembered this particular cow. "That one there with the white marking," Pete said, pointing toward Luna. "She's been at Henderson Ranch for about 5 years. Used to be one of their best milkers, but she's getting older and her production dropped. The ranch manager decided it wasn't worth keeping her around, especially with her being pregnant again." Pete shook his head as he spoke. "Shame, really. She's got good bloodlines and would probably make a fine mother, but Henderson Ranch doesn't have room for sentiment. If an animal isn't making money, it's got to go." Sarah's heart sank as she realized Luna's fate was likely sealed. The auction would begin in 2 hours, and based on her experience, a pregnant dairy cow past her prime wouldn't attract buyers looking for breeding stock. Most bidders at these auctions were representatives from processing plants, looking for animals that could be quickly converted to profit. She tried to focus on her other duties, but found herself drawn back to Luna repeatedly. Each time she passed pen 7, the cow would approach the fence and allow Sarah to scratch her neck through the metal bars. Luna's coat was soft, despite the dust and stress of transport, and she seemed to find comfort in the human contact. As the auction hour approached, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her phone and began making calls. First, she tried local farms and ranchers that might be interested in taking on a pregnant dairy cow. Most were polite but firm in their refusals. Dairy cows required different care than beef cattle, and few operations were set up to handle both. Her next call was to the animal rescue organizations in the area. While several expressed sympathy for Luna's situation, none had the resources or facilities to take in a large animal like a dairy cow. One rescue worker explained that their funding was already stretched thin caring for dogs and cats, and the cost of caring for a cow was beyond their means. Growing desperate, Sarah called her cousin Maria, who lived on a small hobby farm about an hour away. Maria kept a few horses and goats, but had never dealt with cattle. After explaining the situation, Maria admitted that while she would love to help, she didn't have the proper fencing or shelter for a cow, especially one that was pregnant. The auction announcer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, calling for the first lot of cattle. Sarah's time was running out, and she felt a sense of panic building in her chest. She had never before considered buying an animal from the auction herself, but the thought crossed her mind as she watched Luna standing calmly in the pen, seemingly unaware of what was about to happen. Sarah's financial situation was tight. Her job at the auction house paid minimum wage, and she was already struggling to make rent on her small apartment in town. The idea of buying a cow was impractical on every level, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had to do something. As the first lots of cattle were sold, Sarah found herself calculating numbers in her head. If she could somehow scrape together enough money to buy Luna, where would she keep her? Her apartment complex certainly didn't allow livestock, and she didn't know anyone with property who could help. The auction moved quickly, with each lot selling within minutes. Sarah watched as healthy young steers brought good prices from feedlot buyers, while older animals sold for significantly less to processing plants. Her heart raced as she realized that Pen 7 would be called soon. In a moment of desperation, Sarah remembered her old high school friend Jake Wilson, who had inherited his family's ranch after his father passed away 2 years earlier. Jake had struggled to keep the ranch running and had been forced to sell most of his cattle to pay off debts. Sarah hadn't spoken to him in years, but she decided to give him a call. Jake's phone rang several times before he answered, his voice tired and strained. When Sarah explained who she was and why she was calling, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Sarah Martinez? Wow, it's been forever," Jake said. "I heard you were working at the auction house. Listen, I'd love to help, but things are really tight here right now. I'm barely keeping the lights on as it is." Sarah's heart sank, but she pressed on, explaining Luna's situation and her gentle nature. She found herself describing how the cow had shown kindness to the smaller animals and how intelligent she seemed. As she spoke, she could hear Jake's breathing change on the other end of the line. "You know," Jake said slowly, "my grandmother always said that animals choose their people, not the other way around. She used to tell me stories about cows that would only let certain people milk them, horses that would only ride for one person. Maybe this cow was trying to tell you something." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Jake asking detailed questions about Luna's condition and pregnancy. He explained that while his ranch was struggling financially, he did have the proper facilities for cattle. His pastures were good, and he still had the old dairy barn from when his grandfather ran milk cows decades earlier. "I'll make you a deal," Jake finally said. "If you can buy her at the auction, you can bring her here. I won't charge you anything for the first month, and we can work out a payment plan after that. I could actually use the company, to be honest. This place gets pretty lonely." Sarah felt a surge of hope, but the reality of the situation hit her immediately. She had maybe $300 in her checking account, and she had no idea how much Luna might sell for. Dairy cows typically brought less money than beef cattle, but she was still a large animal with potential value for her unborn calf. As Pen 7 was announced over the loudspeaker, Sarah made her way to the auction ring. Her hands were shaking as she registered for a bidder number, something she had never done in her 3 years of working at the facility. The clerk looked at her strangely, knowing she was an employee, but processed her paperwork without comment. The auctioneer began describing the cattle in Pen 7, rattling off details about their weight, breed, and origin. When he got to Luna, he mentioned that she was a pregnant Holstein Jersey cross, due to calve in approximately 3 months. The bidding started at $50. Sarah's heart pounded as she listened to the rapid-fire cadence of the auctioneer. Several buyers showed interest initially, but as the price climbed past $100, the competition narrowed. A representative from a local processing plant was bidding aggressively, seeing value in both Luna and her unborn calf. At $250, there were only 2 bidders left, Sarah and the processing plant representative. Sarah's palms were sweating as she held up her bidder card, knowing she was nearly at her financial limit. The processing plant representative looked confident, probably assuming that no one else would push the bidding much higher for a pregnant dairy cow. $260, $260, do I hear $270? The auctioneer called out. The processing plant representative nodded, and Sarah felt her heart sink. She had reached her absolute maximum, and it looked like Luna was going to end up exactly where Sarah had feared. The auctioneer looked around the room for any other bidders. Just as he was about to bring down the gavel, a voice called out from the back of the auction ring, 300! Everyone turned to see who had made the bid, including Sarah. Standing near the entrance was a tall woman in a weathered cowboy hat and dusty jeans. Sarah had never seen her before, but something about her presence commanded attention. The woman had silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. The processing plant representative hesitated for a moment, then shook his head and stepped back. At $300, the profit margin on Luna was getting thin, especially with the uncertainty of her pregnancy. The auctioneer called out for any other bidders, but the ring had gone quiet. Sold for $300 to bidder number 47, the gavel came down with a sharp crack. Sarah stood frozen in place, unsure whether to feel relieved or disappointed. Luna had been saved from the processing plant, but Sarah didn't know anything about the mysterious bidder who had outbid her at the last moment. As the crowd began to disperse and move on to the next lot, Sarah made her way toward the woman in the cowboy hat. "Excuse me," Sarah called out as she approached. "That cow you just bought, can I ask what you're planning to do with her?" The woman turned around and studied Sarah with intelligent grey eyes. There was something kind but weathered about her face, the look of someone who had spent years working outdoors and dealing with life's challenges head-on. "You're the young lady who was bidding on her," the woman said. It wasn't a question. "I could see you cared about that particular animal. That's not something you see every day at these auctions." Sarah nodded, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "I work here, and I've been watching her all morning. She seems special somehow. I was worried about where she might end up." The woman extended a work-worn hand. "I'm Margaret Caldwell. I run a ranch about 20 miles west of here. And you're right about that cow being special." I could see it from the moment they brought her into the ring. As they talked, Margaret explained that she had been coming to these auctions for over 30 years, usually looking for young cattle to add to her herd. But something about Luna had caught her attention in the same way it had captured Sarah's. "I've learned to trust my instincts over the years," Margaret said. "When an animal speaks to you, you listen. That cow has been through something difficult, but she's got spirit. I can see it in the way she carries herself." Sarah found herself telling Margaret about her morning with Luna, describing the cow's gentle nature and intelligence. Margaret listened intently, nodding occasionally and asking thoughtful questions about Sarah's observations. "You've got a good eye," Margaret said when Sarah finished her story. "Not everyone would have noticed those details, especially working at a place like this where you see hundreds of animals every week." As they continued talking, Sarah learned more about Margaret's background. The Caldwell Ranch had been in her family for 4 generations, originally started by her great-grandfather in the 1890s. Margaret had taken over operations when her father died 15 years earlier, making her one of the few women ranch owners in the area. "It hasn't been easy," Margaret admitted. "The cattle business is tough enough without having to prove yourself because you're a woman. But I've managed to keep the place going, and I've learned a thing or two about breeding animals along the way." Margaret's ranch focused on sustainable cattle raising, with an emphasis on animal welfare and environmental stewardship. She kept a smaller herd than most commercial operations, but she took pride in knowing each animal individually and providing them with the best possible care. "I've got a good spot for your friend Luna," Margaret said, gesturing toward the pen where Luna was waiting to be loaded. "I've got a pasture close to the house where I keep expecting mothers. She'll have shelter, good grass, and plenty of space to move around as her pregnancy progresses." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her, but also a sense of sadness that she wouldn't be able to stay involved in Luna's story. Margaret seemed to sense her conflicted emotions. "You know," Margaret said thoughtfully, "I could use some help around the ranch. I'm not getting any younger, and calving season is coming up. Would you be interested in learning about ranch work? I could teach you everything you need to know about caring for cattle, and you could keep an eye on Luna as she settles in." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. The offer seemed too good to be true. She had been feeling increasingly uncomfortable with her job at the auction house, watching animals pass through without being able to form connections with them. The idea of working directly with cattle in a setting focused on their welfare was exactly what she had been dreaming about.
"I don't have much experience with ranch work,"
Sarah said honestly.
"I mean, I grew up around cattle, but that was years ago, and we never had an operation as large as yours sounds."
Margaret smiled. "Experience can be taught. Instinct and compassion can't." You showed both of those today when you tried to help Luna. That's worth more than years of technical knowledge. They discussed the practical details as they walked back towards Luna's pen. Margaret offered Sarah a job as a ranch hand with room and board included in a small cabin on the property. The pay wouldn't be much more than what she was making at the auction house, but the opportunity to learn and work with animals in a positive environment was exactly what Sarah had been hoping for. As they approached Pen 7, Luna looked up and made eye contact with Sarah. The cow's expression seemed almost hopeful, as if she somehow understood that her situation was about to improve. Margaret noticed the interaction between Sarah and Luna and nodded approvingly. She's already bonded with you, Margaret observed. That's going to make the transition much easier for her. Moving to a new place is stressful for cattle, but having a familiar face around will help her settle in more quickly. The afternoon sun was beginning to lower in the sky as Margaret made arrangements for Luna's transport to the ranch. She had brought her own trailer, a spacious unit designed for the comfort and safety of the animals being transported. Sarah helped guide Luna up the ramp, speaking softly to her and offering reassurance. Luna entered the trailer calmly, seeming to trust that Sarah wouldn't lead her anywhere dangerous. Once she was secured inside, Margaret double-checked all the safety equipment and made sure Luna had access to fresh water for the journey. "Why don't you follow me out to the ranch?" Margaret suggested. "You can see where Luna will be living, and we can talk more about the job opportunity. If you decided something you want to pursue, you could start as early as next week." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she drove her old pickup truck behind Margaret's trailer. The auction house was growing smaller in her rearview mirror, and with it, a chapter of her life that had felt increasingly wrong. Ahead of her was an unknown future, but one that felt full of possibility. The drive to the Caldwell Ranch took them through rolling hills covered with oak trees and native grasses. It was beautiful country, the kind of landscape that Sarah remembered from her childhood on her grandfather's ranch. As they turned onto a gravel road marked with a simple wooden sign reading Caldwell Ranch, Sarah felt a sense of homecoming that she hadn't experienced in years. The ranch headquarters consisted of a modest two-story farmhouse surrounded by mature shade trees, several well-maintained barns, and a complex of corrals and pastures that stretched as far as the eye could see. Everything looked purposeful and cared for, from the freshly painted fence rails to the neat stacks of hay bales in the storage shed. Margaret backed the trailer up to a loading chute near one of the barns, and together they unloaded Luna into a small holding pen. The cow stepped out cautiously, raising her head to take in the new sights and smells of her surroundings. Her pregnancy was more obvious now that she was standing on level ground, and Sarah could see that she would likely give birth within the next few months. "This is where she'll stay tonight," Margaret explained, showing Sarah the holding pen with its shelter, fresh water, and pile of sweet-smelling hay. "Tomorrow I'll move her out to the maternity pasture where she'll have more room to roam and get acquainted with the other expecting mothers." As they stood watching Luna explore her temporary home, Margaret began sharing more details about the ranch operations. The Caldwell Ranch ran about 200 head of cattle on 1,500 acres of pasture and rangeland. Margaret focused on raising high-quality beef cattle using rotational grazing practices that kept the land healthy and productive. "The key to successful ranching isn't just about making money," Margaret explained. "It's about understanding that we're stewards of the land and the animals. When you take care of both, the financial success usually follows." Sarah was impressed by Margaret's philosophy and the obvious care that had gone into every aspect of the ranch. She could see that this was a place where animals were valued as individuals, not just as economic units. The contrast with the auction house couldn't have been more stark. As evening approached, Margaret showed Sarah the cabin where she would live if she accepted the job offer. It was a small but comfortable structure about a quarter-mile from the main house, with one bedroom, a basic kitchen, and a sitting area with a fireplace. The cabin had been built by Margaret's grandfather for hired hands and had been recently updated with modern plumbing and electrical systems. "It's not fancy," Margaret said, "but it's comfortable and quiet. You'd have privacy when you want it, but you'd also be close enough to help with any emergencies that might come up." Standing on the cabin's small porch, Sarah could see Luna's holding pen in the distance, and beyond that, the pastures where cattle grazed peacefully in the fading daylight. The scene was exactly what she had been longing for, without quite realizing it. "I'd like to accept your offer," Sarah said, turning to face Margaret. "I mean, if you're serious about it. I can't promise I'll be perfect at ranch work right away, but I'm willing to learn, and I care about the animals." Margaret smiled and extended her hand for a handshake that felt like a covenant. Welcome to the Caldwell Ranch, Sarah. I think this is going to work out well for all of us, including Luna. As they walked back toward Margaret's truck for the drive back to town, Sarah felt a sense of anticipation building inside her. Tomorrow, she would give her notice at the auction house and begin preparing for a completely new chapter in her life. It felt scary and exciting at the same time, like standing at the edge of a cliff and deciding to jump, trusting that she would land safely on the other side. Luna watched them go from her pen, chewing thoughtfully on a mouthful of hay. Somehow, Sarah thought, the cow seemed to understand that her luck had finally changed. They had all found something they hadn't even known they were looking for that day at the auction house. And Sarah had the feeling that this was just the beginning of Luna's remarkable story. Sarah's first week at the Caldwell Ranch passed in a blur of new experiences and learning opportunities. Margaret proved to be a patient but thorough teacher, introducing Sarah to the daily routines of ranch life, while sharing decades of accumulated wisdom about cattle behavior and land management. Each morning began before dawn with a check of all the animals. Sarah learned to spot signs of illness or injury, how to read the subtle communications between cattle, and the importance of maintaining consistent routines that kept the herd calm and secure. Luna had been moved to the maternity pasture after her first night in the holding pen, and Sarah made it a point to visit her every morning during the rounds. The maternity pasture was a special place on the Caldwell Ranch. Margaret had designed it specifically for pregnant cows and new mothers, with easy access to shelter, multiple water sources, and the richest grass on the property. The area was fenced separately from the main herd, creating a peaceful environment where expecting mothers could rest without the stress of competition from larger animals. Luna had settled into her new home remarkably well. Within days of her arrival, she had established herself as a calming presence among the other pregnant cows. Sarah noticed that nervous or agitated animals would often position themselves near Luna, seeming to draw comfort from her steady demeanor. "She's a natural leader," Margaret observed one morning as they watched Luna guide a skittish young heifer toward the water trough. "Some cattle are born with that quality. They don't dominate through aggression, but through confidence and wisdom. It's a rare trait, especially in an animal that's been through what she has." Margaret had spent considerable time researching Luna's background, making calls to contacts in the cattle industry to learn more about her history. What she discovered painted a picture of an exceptional animal who had been undervalued by her previous owners. Luna had been born on a small dairy farm in East Texas, where she was raised with individual attention and care. Her mother had been known for her gentle temperament and high milk production, traits that Luna had inherited. When the small farm was sold to a larger agricultural corporation, Luna had been transferred to the Henderson Ranch along with several other dairy cows. At Henderson Ranch, Luna had been an outstanding producer for her first 3 years, consistently ranking among the top milk producers in the herd. However, as she aged and her production began to naturally decline, the ranch's focus on profit margins made her expendable. The fact that she was pregnant again was seen as an inconvenience rather than an opportunity. They never looked at the whole picture, Margaret explained to Sarah as they reviewed Luna's veterinary records, which had been forwarded from the Henderson Ranch. They saw declining milk production and made a short-sighted decision. What they didn't consider was her genetic value, her maternal instincts, or her potential as a breeding cow. Sarah was learning that cattle ranching involved much more than simply putting animals in a field and hoping for the best. Margaret taught her about selective breeding, nutrition management, and the complex social dynamics within cattle herds. Every decision had long-term consequences, and successful ranchers needed to think years ahead rather than focusing only on immediate profits. Luna's pregnancy was progressing normally, according to Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the veterinarian who provided medical care for the Caldwell Ranch. Dr. Rodriguez visited the ranch weekly to check on the animals, and she had taken a special interest in Luna's case after hearing the story of her rescue from the auction house. "She's in excellent condition for a cow her age." Dr. Wu, Rodriguez told Sarah and Margaret during one of her visits. Her previous owners may not have valued her properly, but they did provide good basic care. She's well nourished, her vaccinations are up to date, and there are no signs of stress or health problems related to her transport and change of environment. The veterinarian estimated that Luna would give birth in about 6 weeks, and she praised Margaret's decision to place her in the maternity pasture. The stress-free environment would be beneficial for both Luna and her developing calf, increasing the chances of a healthy birth and strong maternal bonding. As Sarah's confidence grew with her ranch work, she found herself taking on more responsibilities. Margaret gradually assigned her independent tasks. from maintaining fences to monitoring the health of individual animals. Sarah's background at the auction house, while emotionally difficult, had given her experience in evaluating cattle and recognizing potential problems. One of Sarah's favorite duties was the evening feeding routine in the maternity pasture. While the pregnant cows had access to grass throughout the day, Margaret supplemented their nutrition with specially formulated feed that provided extra vitamins and minerals needed during pregnancy. The feeding time also provided an opportunity for close observation of each animal. Luna had become the unofficial leader of the maternity group, establishing a routine that the other cows began to follow. She would approach the feeding area first, but instead of rushing to claim the best position, she would wait and watch as Margaret or Sarah distributed the feed. Only after ensuring that the younger or more timid cows had access would Luna move to her own feeding spot. "She's teaching them," Margaret observed one evening as they watched Luna's feeding behavior. Experienced cows often mentor younger ones, but Luna is exceptionally good at it. She's showing the first-time mothers how to stay calm and organized even when they're excited about food. This maternal behavior extended beyond feeding time. When storms passed through the area, Luna would guide the group toward the shelter barn. If one of the cows became separated from the group, Luna would position herself where the lost animal could see her and make low calling sounds until the cow rejoined the herd. Sarah began keeping a journal to document Luna's behaviors and the changes in her condition as her pregnancy progressed. Margaret encouraged this practice, explaining that detailed observation records were valuable for both immediate care and long-term breeding decisions. "Every cow is different," Margaret said as she reviewed Sarah's notes. "The more we understand about Luna's personality and maternal instincts, the better we can care for her and her calf. Plus, this kind of information helps us make decisions about future breeding programs." The journal also served as a way for Sarah to process the dramatic changes in her own life. Writing about Luna's daily activities and gradual adaptation to ranch life helped her reflect on her own journey from the auction house to the Cold War ranch. Both she and Luna were discovering new versions of themselves in an environment where they were valued and cared for. As Luna's due date approached, Margaret began preparing the birthing stall in the maternity barn. The stall was spacious and comfortable, with deep bedding, excellent ventilation, and easy access for veterinary care if needed. While many cows preferred to give birth outdoors, having the stall available provided options depending on weather conditions and individual preferences. "Some cows want privacy when they're ready to calve," Margaret explained as they arranged fresh straw in the stall. "Others prefer to stay with their herd where they feel secure. We'll let Luna decide what feels right to her when the time comes." Margaret's approach to cattle care emphasized respecting the natural instincts and preferences of individual animals. Rather than forcing all cows to follow the same procedures, she adapted her management practices to accommodate different personalities and needs. This philosophy had resulted in healthier animals, easier births, and stronger bonds between mothers and calves. Sarah was amazed by the depth of knowledge required to be a successful rancher. Beyond the basic care of feeding and watering, Margaret understood genetics, nutrition science, veterinary medicine, soil management, and wildlife ecology. Every aspect of the ranch operation was interconnected, requiring careful balance and constant attention. "People think ranching is simple," Margaret said one afternoon, as they repaired a section of fence together. "They imagine cowboys riding around on horseback, maybe moving cattle from one place to another. But modern ranching is really a complex agricultural science. You're managing an ecosystem, not just a bunch of animals." The Caldwell Ranch's rotational grazing system was a perfect example of this complexity. Margaret moved cattle between different pastures on a carefully planned schedule that allowed grasslands to recover while preventing overgrazing. The timing of these moves depended on weather conditions, grass growth rates, soil moisture, and the nutritional needs of different groups of cattle. Sarah learned to read the signs that indicated when pastures were ready for grazing and when they needed rest. She studied the different grass species that grew on the ranch and their varying nutritional content throughout the growing season. What had initially seemed like empty fields revealed themselves to be complex ecosystems requiring careful management. Luna's pregnancy had progressed to the point where her calf was visibly moving inside her. Sarah could often see the outline of tiny hooves or a head pressing against Luna's side, especially when the cow was resting in the shade during hot afternoons. These moments reminded Sarah of the miracle that was about to unfold. Margaret shared stories of memorable births from previous years including dramatic rescues during severe weather and the joy of watching newborn calves take their first steps. Each birth was unique, she explained, and successful ranchers learned to be prepared for anything while trusting in the natural process that had been working for thousands of years. Luna's age and experience are actually advantages, Margaret told Sarah as they watched the cow grazing peacefully in the evening light. She's been through this before, so she knows what to expect. Her maternal instincts are well developed and she's physically mature enough to handle the demands of birth and nursing. Dr. Rodriguez increased her visits to twice weekly as Luna's due date approached. During her examinations, she confirmed that the calf was in the correct position for birth and that Luna's health remained excellent. The veterinarian also reviewed emergency procedures with Sarah and Margaret, ensuring they would be prepared if any complications arose. Most births go smoothly if you don't interfere unnecessarily, Dr. Margot Rodriguez explained. Cows have been giving birth without human help for millions of years. Our job is to provide a safe environment and be ready to step in only if there's a genuine problem. Sarah appreciated this philosophy, which aligned with her growing understanding of Margaret's overall approach to ranching. Rather than imposing human control over every natural process, the goal was to work with nature while being prepared to provide assistance when truly needed. As Luna's behavior began to change in subtle ways that indicated birth was approaching, Sarah found herself spending more time in the maternity pasture. Luna had become restless, walking more than usual and showing less interest in food. She also began seeking out quiet corners of the pasture, away from the other cows. She's looking for a nesting spot, Margaret explained when Sarah mentioned Luna's new behaviors. In the wild, pregnant cows seek out secluded areas where they feel safe giving birth. Even though she's in a protected environment, those instincts are still strong. Margaret decided to move Luna to a smaller paddock adjacent to the maternity barn, where she would have privacy while still being close enough for easy monitoring. The paddock had access to both the barn and a small outdoor area, giving Luna options for where she felt most comfortable. The night Luna went into labor, Sarah was awakened by Margaret knocking on her cabin door. It was just after midnight, and Margaret had noticed signs during her evening check that suggested birth was imminent. They grabbed flashlights and hurried through the darkness to the maternity barn. Luna had chosen to position herself just inside the barn, where she had access to the outdoor paddock, but also the shelter and warmth of the building. She was lying on her side in the deep straw bedding, breathing heavily, but appearing calm and focused. "She's doing great," Margaret whispered as they settled into a corner of the barn, where they could observe without interfering. "See how relaxed she is? She's trusting her instincts and letting her body do what it knows how to do." Sarah was struck by the peaceful atmosphere in the barn. Despite the intensity of what was happening, Luna appeared confident and in control of the situation. Her breathing was rhythmic and purposeful, and she occasionally lifted her head to look around, as if checking that her environment remained safe and secure. The birth process unfolded over the next 2 hours, with Luna working through each contraction with remarkable composure. Margaret and Sarah remained quietly in the background, ready to help if needed, but respecting Luna's natural process. Occasionally, Margaret would check on Luna's progress, but mostly they simply watched and waited. As dawn began to break over the ranch, Luna gave a final, powerful push, and her calf slid onto the straw bedding. The newborn was a beautiful heifer with Luna's gentle brown eyes and distinctive heart-shaped white marking on her forehead. Mother and baby lay still for a moment, both recovering from the intensity of birth. Then Luna lifted her head and began the ancient ritual of cleaning her calf, licking away the birth fluids while making low, encouraging sounds. The calf responded by lifting her own head and attempting to coordinate her long, wobbly legs for her first efforts at standing. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she watched the tender interaction between mother and daughter. After Luna's difficult journey from the auction house to the ranch, seeing her successfully bring new life into the world felt like the completion of a miraculous transformation. "Welcome to the world, little one," Margaret said softly, as the calf finally managed to stand on shaking legs and began searching for her mother's milk. "You've got quite a story ahead of you." The calf's first nursing was successful, with Luna standing patiently while her daughter learned the mechanics of feeding. Margaret explained that the first milk, called colostrum, was crucial for providing antibodies that would protect the calf from diseases during her vulnerable early weeks of life. Over the next few days, Sarah marveled at Luna's transformation into motherhood. The cow, who had seemed wise and nurturing with the other cattle in the maternity pasture, became even more focused and protective with her own offspring. She kept the calf close to her side, guiding her movements and watching vigilantly for any potential threats. Margaret named the calf Hope, explaining that she represented the future of the ranch and the possibility of new beginnings for Luna's bloodline. Hope was strong and healthy, inheriting her mother's calm temperament along with what appeared to be excellent physical conformation. She's going to be a special one, Margaret predicted as they watched Hope nursing enthusiastically while Luna gazed down at her with obvious pride. Good mothers tend to raise good daughters, and Luna is clearly an exceptional mother. Rodriguez's post-birth examination confirmed that both mother and calf were in excellent health. She was particularly impressed with Luna's maternal behavior and Hope's vigorous appetite and rapid growth. Within a week of her birth, Hope had doubled her weight and was showing signs of the intelligence and curiosity that characterized her mother. Sarah's role at the ranch had evolved during Luna's pregnancy and birth to include detailed care of the mother-calf pairs. She learned about the nutritional needs of nursing mothers, the importance of vaccination schedules for calves, and the gradual process of weaning that would eventually make Hope independent of her mother's milk. But more importantly, Sarah had witnessed the power of compassion and second chances. Luna's journey from a discarded dairy cow headed for slaughter to a valued member of the Caldwell ranch herd demonstrated that every life had inherent worth beyond mere economic calculations. As Sarah updated her journal with the details of Hope's birth and early days, she reflected on how much her own life had changed since that morning at the auction house when she first noticed Luna's heart-shaped marking. Like Luna, Sarah had found a place where her true nature could flourish, where her instincts and caring were valued rather than seen as weaknesses in a hard business world. Margaret often spoke about the interconnectedness of life on the ranch, how the health of the soil affected the grass, which nourished the cattle, which in turn contributed to the fertility of the land through their grazing patterns. Sarah was beginning to understand that she too was part of this interconnected system, and that her presence had enriched the ranch just as the ranch had transformed her own life. The story of Luna and Hope was just beginning, but already their influence was being felt throughout the Caldwell Ranch herd. Other cattle seemed drawn to Luna's calm confidence, and Hope's playful energy brought joy to the entire maternity pasture. Margaret began making plans to keep Hope as a breeding cow, recognizing the valuable genetic trait she had inherited from her exceptional mother. As summer progressed and Hope grew stronger and more independent, Sarah looked forward to the next chapter of their story. Luna had proven that every animal deserved a chance to show their true nature, and Hope represented the promise that this legacy would continue for generations to come on the Caldwell Ranch. 6 months after Hope's birth, the Caldwell Ranch had become a different place. Word of Luna's remarkable story had spread throughout the local ranching community, bringing visitors who wanted to see the cow who had been saved from the auction house and her beautiful daughter. Margaret welcomed these visits, seeing them as opportunities to educate other ranchers about the value of looking beyond immediate profit margins. Sarah had grown into her role as ranch manager, a position that Margaret created specifically for her after recognizing her natural talent for understanding and caring for cattle. The shy young woman who had worked at the auction house had been replaced by a confident rancher who could spot potential health problems from across a pasture and handle difficult situations with calm authority. Luna's influence on the ranch herd had been profound. Her calm maternal presence had improved the behavior of other cattle, particularly the younger animals who learned from her example. Margaret often pointed out to visitors how a single exceptional animal could elevate an entire operation, demonstrating the importance of looking for quality rather than simply quantity. Hope had developed into everything Margaret had predicted and more. The young heifer possessed her mother's intelligence and gentle nature, while displaying a curiosity and energy that delighted everyone who met her. She had become the unofficial mascot of the ranch, often following Sarah around like a large friendly dog during her daily rounds. The success of Luna's integration into the ranch had led Margaret to reconsider her cattle acquisition strategy. Instead of purchasing only young animals with obvious potential, she began attending auction houses specifically to look for older cattle who might be overlooked by other buyers but could contribute valuable genetics and experience to her herd. "Luna taught me that wisdom has value," Margaret explained to a group of agricultural students who visited the ranch as part of their coursework. "In our rush to maximize efficiency, we sometimes discard animals who have tremendous value as mentors and mothers. Luna has made every cow on this ranch better through her example." This philosophy had led to the rescue of 3 other older cows over the past months, each with her own story of near miss at processing plants. While none had quite the dramatic impact of Luna's arrival, each had found her place in the ranch community and contributed to the overall health and stability of the herd. Sarah had also begun working with local animal welfare organizations, sharing Luna's story at fundraising events and educational programs. The tale of the pregnant cow saved from slaughter resonated with audiences who might never have considered the individual personalities and intelligence of farm animals. During one such presentation at a suburban elementary school, Sarah brought along photo albums documenting Luna and Hope's journey from auction house to ranch life. The children were fascinated by the pictures showing Hope's first steps, her playful interactions with other calves, and her obvious bond with her mother. "Do cows have feelings like people do?" asked a 7-year-old girl after Sarah finished her presentation. Sarah smiled and showed the children a photograph of Luna nuzzling Hope during the calf's first day of life. "Look at this picture," she said. "What do you see in Luna's eyes when she's looking at her baby?" "Love," several children said simultaneously, and Sarah nodded. "That's exactly right. Cows love their babies just like your parents love you. They worry about them, teach them how to be safe, and feel proud when they do well." Luna shows us every day that farm animals have rich emotional lives if we take the time to notice. These educational outreach efforts became increasingly important to Sarah as she realized how many people had never considered the individual personalities of farm animals. Luna's story provided a compelling way to bridge the gap between urban and rural communities, helping city dwellers understand the complex realities of modern agriculture. Margaret supported these activities, recognizing that public education about responsible farming practices could benefit the entire industry. The Caldwell Ranch began hosting quarterly open house events where families could meet Luna and Hope, learn about sustainable cattle ranching, and understand the connection between animal welfare and high-quality beef production. The first open house attracted over 200 visitors, far more than Margaret had expected. Families drove from as far as Houston and Dallas to meet the famous rescue cow and her calf. Luna seemed to understand that she was the star of these events, approaching visitors with calm confidence and allowing children to pet her soft coat and scratch behind her ears. Hope, now a gangly yearling, was equally popular with visitors. Her playful nature and obvious intelligence charmed adults and children alike. She had learned to respond to her name and would come when called, demonstrating the individual personality that many visitors had never associated with cattle. "I had no idea cows were so smart," commented one mother as she watched Hope solve a simple puzzle that Sarah had created to demonstrate bovine intelligence. "I just thought they stood around eating grass all day." Sarah used moments like these to explain the complex social structures within cattle herds, the problem-solving abilities that cows displayed daily, and the emotional bonds between mothers and offspring that could last for years. Luna and Hope provided living examples of these concepts, making abstract ideas concrete and relatable. The success of the open house events led Margaret to consider expanding the educational aspect of the ranch operation. She began developing partnerships with local schools and agricultural programs, offering field trips and internship opportunities that would allow students to learn about sustainable farming practices firsthand. Sarah found herself becoming a spokesperson not just for Luna's story, but for a more humane approach to livestock agriculture. She spoke at farming conferences about the economic benefits of treating animals as individuals rather than production units, citing the improved health and productivity she had observed in the Caldwell Ranch herd. "When you respect animals as individuals," Sarah told an audience of cattle ranchers at a state agricultural meeting, "they respond with better behavior, easier handling, and improved reproduction rates." Luna wasn't just saved from slaughter, she became the foundation for improving our entire operation. The presentation included data showing decreased veterinary costs, reduced stress-related illness, and improved pregnancy rates since Margaret had implemented more individualized care practices inspired by Luna's needs. The economic argument resonated with ranchers who might not have been moved by purely ethical considerations. Luna's second pregnancy, which occurred through natural breeding with one of Margaret's prize bulls, was monitored even more carefully than her first. Sarah had become expert at reading the subtle signs of cattle behavior and health, and she documented every aspect of Luna's gestation for both practical ranch management and educational purposes. The pregnancy proceeded smoothly, with Luna maintaining her role as herd matriarch while her body prepared for motherhood once again. Hope, now a mature yearling, seemed to understand that her mother was expecting another calf and became even more protective and attentive than usual. It's amazing to watch the family dynamics, Margaret observed as they monitored Luna grazing with Hope close beside her. Hope is preparing to be a big sister, just like human children do. She's already practicing maternal behaviors by looking after some of the younger calves in the herd. When Luna gave birth to her second calf at the Caldwell Ranch, a strong bull calf with his mother's distinctive heart-shaped marking, the event was documented by a freelance journalist who was writing an article about sustainable agriculture. The resulting story, published in a national farming magazine, brought even more attention to Luna's remarkable journey. The article, titled "From Auction Block to Matriarch: How One Cow Changed a Ranch," featured photographs of Luna with both her offspring and quotes from Margaret and Sarah about the transformation of their operation. The piece emphasized the economic and ethical benefits of treating livestock as individuals while maintaining profitable ranch operations. Following the magazine article, the Caldwell Ranch began receiving inquiries from other ranchers interested in learning about their management practices. Margaret and Sarah found themselves hosting a steady stream of visitors who wanted to see Luna's impact firsthand and learn how to implement similar approaches on their own operations. One particularly memorable visitor was Jake Wilson, Sarah's high school friend who had originally offered to provide pasture for Luna when Sarah was desperate to save her from the auction house. Jake had managed to save his family ranch from bankruptcy and was now looking to expand his operation using more sustainable methods. "I never forgot that phone call you made," Jake told Sarah as they toured the ranch together. "Listening to you describe that cow and how much you cared about her future made me realize I needed to look at my own animals differently. It changed how I think about ranching." Jake's operation had indeed transformed over the months since that desperate phone call. Instead of focusing solely on quick profits, he had begun paying attention to animal welfare and individual needs. His cattle were healthier, his pastures were more productive, and his operation was finally profitable in a sustainable way. Luna saved more than her own life that day, Jake reflected as he watched the famous cow grazing peacefully with her two offspring nearby. She started a ripple effect that's changing how people think about cattle throughout this whole region. The ripple effect Jake described was indeed expanding beyond the local area. Agricultural extension agents began using Luna's story as a case study in livestock management courses at state universities. The combination of economic success and animal welfare innovation at the Caldwell Ranch provided a compelling example for students who had become the next generation of farmers and ranchers. Sarah was invited to speak at these university programs, sharing her journey from auction house employee to ranch manager while emphasizing the practical benefits of individualized animal care. Her presentations were particularly effective because she spoke from experience rather than theory. Having witnessed Luna's transformation firsthand, "Every animal has a story," Sarah would tell her audiences. "Our job as farmers and ranchers is to create an environment where those stories can have happy endings." Luna's rescue wasn't just about saving one cow. It was about recognizing the potential that exists in every animal if we're willing to look for it. The educational impact of Luna's story extended to veterinary medicine as well. Dr. Rodriguez began using the case in her own teaching, demonstrating how proper nutrition, stress reduction, and individualized care could improve reproductive success and overall herd health. The detailed records that Sarah had kept throughout Luna's pregnancies provided valuable data for these educational programs. Luna represents best practices in large animal medicine, Dr. Barthord. Rodriguez explained to a group of veterinary students during one of their visits to the ranch. She shows us how environmental factors, social dynamics, and individual attention can work together to optimize animal health and productivity. The veterinary students were fascinated by Luna's gentle acceptance of human handling and medical procedures. Unlike many cattle who became stressed during examinations, Luna seemed to understand that the attention was beneficial and cooperated fully with health checks and vaccinations. Margaret often joked that Luna had become the ranch's best employee, contributing not only through her own offspring but also through her positive influence on other cattle and her role in educating visitors. The cow, who had been destined for slaughter, had become the foundation of a new approach to ranching that was attracting national attention. As Hope and her younger brother grew and developed, they continued to display the exceptional qualities they had inherited from their mother. Both calves were intelligent, calm, and socially adept, making them ideal ambassadors for the ranch during educational events and visitor tours. Margaret had already made arrangements to retain both of Luna's offspring as breeding stock. Recognizing the genetic value they represented, Hope would eventually become a foundation female in the ranch's breeding program, while her brother would be evaluated as a potential herd sire if his development continued to progress favorably. Luna's legacy isn't just her own story. Margaret explained to a group of 4-H students during one of their visits. It's the genetic contribution she's making to future generations of cattle and the example she's set for how we can treat farm animals with both respect and profitability. The 4-H students were working on projects related to animal science and agriculture, and Luna's story provided them with a real-world example of how compassion and business success could work together. Several students began incorporating Luna's case into their project presentations, spreading awareness of humane livestock practices to their peers and families. Sarah had also begun documenting Luna's story in a book that would combine practical ranching advice with the inspiring tale of the cow's rescue and transformation. The book was intended for both agricultural professionals and general readers interested in understanding the emotional lives of farm animals. People need to know that every animal in the food system has a personality and preferences. Sarah wrote in her introduction, "Luna's story isn't unique because she's somehow special among cattle. It's remarkable because it shows us what's possible when we take the time to see animals as individuals rather than commodities." The writing project had become a way for Sarah to reflect on her own journey from auction house employee to ranch manager and advocate for humane agriculture. Luna had not only changed Sarah's career path, but had also given her a sense of purpose that extended far beyond daily ranch operations. 3 years after Luna's rescue from the auction house, the Caldwell Ranch had become a model operation that regularly hosted visitors from around the world. Agricultural delegations from other countries came to study Margaret's integration of animal welfare principles with profitable ranch management, often specifically requesting to meet the famous rescue cow. Luna, now a mature matron with 3 healthy offspring, had fully embraced her role as ranch matriarch and educational ambassador. She seemed to understand the importance of her story and the impact it was having on changing attitudes toward farm animals. During visitor tours, she would often approach the fence and allow people to interact with her, as if she knew that personal connections were the most powerful way to communicate her message. The transformation of the Caldwell Ranch from a traditional cattle operation to an innovative model of sustainable agriculture had attracted funding from agricultural research institutions interested in studying the economic benefits of improved animal welfare. The data being collected would contribute to scientific understanding of the relationship between animal treatment and production efficiency. Luna started something here that's much bigger than any of us anticipated. Margaret reflected as she and Sarah watched the famous cow grazing peacefully with her family. She proved that doing the right thing for animals can also be the smart business decision. That's a lesson that's going to change agriculture for the better. As the sun set over the Caldwell Ranch on that peaceful evening, Luna lifted her head from grazing and looked directly at Sarah and Margaret, as if acknowledging their role in her remarkable journey from doom to destiny. The heart-shaped marking on her forehead caught the golden light, a symbol of the love and compassion that had saved her life and transformed her into a beacon of hope for farm animals everywhere. Hope and her brother played nearby, their carefree energy a testament to the secure and nurturing environment their mother had found at the ranch. Their future was bright, with opportunities to carry forward Luna's genetic legacy and continue the educational mission that had grown from her rescue. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from a rancher in Montana who had read about Luna's story and was asking for advice about implementing similar practices on his own operation. The message was one of dozens Sarah received each week from farmers and ranchers around the country who were inspired to treat their animals with greater individual attention and care. "Every life matters," Sarah typed back, echoing the lesson that Luna had taught her on that fateful morning at the auction house. "When we save one animal, we sometimes end up saving ourselves in the process." As they walked back toward the ranch house in the gathering darkness, Sarah and Margaret could hear Luna's soft lowing as she called her offspring to settle down for the night. It was a sound of contentment and security, the voice of a cow who had found her place in the world and was making the most of her second chance at life. The story that had begun with Sarah's compassionate impulse to save a pregnant cow from slaughter had evolved into something much larger, a movement toward more humane and sustainable agriculture that honored both the economic realities of farming and the inherent worth of every animal in the system. Luna had become not just a symbol of hope, but a living example of what was possible when people chose to see beyond immediate profit to the deeper values that could guide their decisions. And somewhere in the maternity pasture of the Caldwell Ranch, a cow with a heart-shaped marking on her forehead settled down to sleep, surrounded by her children and secure in the knowledge that her story would continue to inspire others long after her own remarkable life had ended. From doom to destiny, Luna had traveled further than the miles between the auction house and the ranch. She had journeyed from despair to hope, from disposal to treasure, from ending to beginning. Her legacy would live on in every rancher who chose compassion over convenience, in every visitor who learned to see farm animals as individuals, and in every student who studied her case and decided to pursue a career dedicated to improving the lives of agricultural animals. Luna had proven that sometimes the most profound changes begin with a single act of kindness, and that the ripples from such acts can spread far beyond anything the original actors might have imagined. The rescue was complete, but the story would continue for generations to come, carried forward by all those whose lives had been touched by the gentle cow who had been saved from slaughter and had gone on to save so much more than anyone could have dreamed possible on that distant morning when Sarah first noticed the heart-shaped marking that would change everything.